Hey guys, welcome to another video. I just wanted to remind everybody that my videos are kind of long, and I know that they are, but there's a lot of things that I feel is interesting and is kind of pertinent to the project that I'm working on. So if you are one of those people that just wants to see how I fixed it and get on with life, then that's great. I would encourage you to use the 2x speed on the YouTube media player. And that way you can speed through whatever you don't want to see. And then if you need to replay something, you can go back and slow it down and watch it again. But with that said, let's get on with the video. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm going to be doing a video today that I've wanted to do for a long time because I've constantly seen people ask questions about it and wanting to know how to fix this problem. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be replacing the buttons in my JCB 260T joysticks. Now, a lot of you have this problem or know somebody that has had this problem. So this is probably one of the best buttons that was in either of my joysticks. In my Skidsteer. Now, if you'll notice, this is how they would have come from the factory, and they've got this weatherproof soft exterior on them. But like I said, this is one of the best buttons that was on my Skidsteer, and even it was, cracked and ripped and sort of just destroyed. I'll go ahead and take this completely apart and show you guys what they look like. So it had that outer soft part on it. It's got this little piece of this little metal disc in there, and then it's got the actual part of the switch itself. Now this little black thing is what you've got to push. If those pieces are missing on your buttons, then you got to push this little black piece to get your button to work. Now, most of the buttons in my Skidsteer looked like this. They didn't have the soft exterior. The metal disc was gone, and I was just having to literally use my thumbnail to push that little black button. So I decided that I wanted to replace my buttons. Now, any of you who have done much research into JCB, so JCB, they use a lot of Rexroth components, and the joysticks are Rexroth. Well, if you keep going down the rabbit hole and you do the research on these buttons, Rexroth says these buttons are not replaceable. You cannot disassemble your joysticks and change these buttons. And that's just kind of their stance. What they tell you, apparently, I haven't asked, but from what I've researched and what I've read, they just tell you, well, if your buttons don't work, then you just replace a joystick. Problem is maybe the rest of the joystick works just fine, and the joysticks are not cheap. I think the joysticks are probably, it wouldn't surprise me now if they're $1,000 a piece. So if you're like me and you got two joysticks and all the buttons are trash, basically, I don't want to spend $2,000 if the rest of the joystick works just fine. I just want to replace the buttons. So that's what we're going to do today. What I found, I just went to Amazon and I found some cheap switches. Now, I'm going to say this up front in the beginning, that these switches are not the same quality from a manufacturing standpoint as the stock switches would be. Now, I have already replaced the switches in my left-hand joystick, which I'll show you in just a few minutes. And everything seems to work just fine. But these buttons were, I think, I bought a kit that had 4 of each color. And there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 colors. So I think this kit was like $20. And so, I'm not going to use all those, and so I'll have spare buttons if one of these ever goes out. I'll have a spare and just swap it straight back in. But so that's the thing. Like I said, I think that this I think that kit was $20, and I think the absolute closest I could find from the company that provides these to Rexroth, I couldn't find this particular switch because I couldn't find the press in. But what I did find is a switch very, very similar to this, only instead of the press in fit, it used a threaded style like this with a jam nut. But as far as the way it actuated and the fact that it used the little soft plastic thing here on top, it was the same. But still, I mean, if these switches can't last any better than that, even this is another good one that's ripped and bad. If these switches that Rexroth used can't last any better than this, then I don't want to put these back in there anyways. I mean, honestly. And then I think that the ones that had the thread-on nut, the jam nut style, I think they were like, the cheapest I could get them was like $19 a piece. And I need all the buttons on my joysticks replaced. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I need at least 8 buttons. So, do the math. Basically $20 a piece for 8 buttons. I didn't want to spend $160 just for buttons when they don't last any better than this. So, anyways, that's the story. That's why I'm going to be using these cheaper ones from Amazon. And like I said, these buttons are a lot cheaper. The manufacturing quality is not the same, but so far so good. They seem to work just fine. I haven't found one yet that was defective right out of the box. So, anyways, let's get to it. All right, so here's here's the left-hand joystick that I already worked on and replaced the buttons on. As you can see, the buttons fit just like the ones from the factory did. I didn't have to modify the holes in the plate or anything. You see back here, these ones here in the back, the one for the 2-speed and the one for the auxiliary hydraulics, they fit just fine. And so that's the deal. I mean, this was a very cheap alternative, and these buttons work better than the factory ones because, the factory ones were destroyed and I couldn't find a reasonably priced replacement. So, all right, let's get to it. Here's what the left hand or the right hand looks like. As you can see, this button is completely gone, and these still have the little metal part, but that falls out pretty easy. So, all right, I'm going to get some tools together and we'll get this started. All right, so the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get these little access covers off. There's one here, there's one here, and then down here there's two more screws that we'll have to get out, but they don't have access covers. So the easiest way that I found to get these covers out is to actually just use a very small drill bit. Right here I've got a 1/16 of an inch drill bit, and what I'll do is I'll just drill a hole right in the center of them, and then I'll use a screw to help pull them out. I've tried using like an O-ring pick or something like that. I tried using a corner of a razor blade to get in there and pop these out, but these things are actually in there pretty tight. And if they've never been out before, or if it's been a long time since they have been out, they're pretty problematic to try to get out. I came up with the trick for the drill bit on this one. As you can see, I kind of marred the sides of it at first trying to get it out, and then I finally just decided, well, I need to drill a hole and pull it out that way. So that's going to be how I'm going to get these other two out. That was the best and easiest and least destructive way that I could figure out to get these out. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so I've drilled my hole, and this is just a little screw that I found over in my cabinet, and I've got it kind of screwed in, just kind of hand tight. And so all you got to do now, hopefully, is just kind of pull and just kind of wiggle just a little bit. There you go. And it'll just pop right out. And one thing to notice as well is that it's keyed. There's a key on top. So when you go to put these back in, you got to make sure that you have them clocked right, or they won't go back in. So hopefully you can see that keyway there. There it'll be on the left side. All right, so I've got this other one up here. I've got a hole drilled in it, and I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, now we got both of those out, and we can see inside there the little screws. Those little screws are a T10, and it doesn't have to be an S. The S just stands for, these got the little hollow tip for the security type Torx. But anyways, you get you a T10, and we'll put it in there. There's 2 down here. And we'll just back those out. These 2 down here, the one there in the center, and the one up here. And then we'll be ready to pull the joystick apart. All right, so we're back. Now we're in the machine. And now that we've got all of our screws out, the 2 here at the bottom, one here, one up here at the top, all we got to do is kind of just pry this around, move it around a little bit, and this half will come off. So this half comes off, and the other half stays connected. This half comes off, and the other half stays connected to the actual control stick itself. So on this side, there's just a switch here on the bottom, and I'm going to try to clean that boot up just a little bit. I'm not really very impressed with any of these controls, either the buttons or the switches, because you know, they seem to deteriorate really quickly. I mean, my machine's only 10 years old, and it's got 2,500 hours on it. And the switch boots and switches are just, you know, they're just kind of junk by now. But anyway. Okay, so we're going to replace the 2 switches at the top and the one right here. Or buttons, rather. All right, so if we flip this over, we're going to see that the switches from the factory have got molded in wiring. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut the wires off as close to the switch, or as close to these buttons as I can. That way I shouldn't have to add any additional wire to these. I'll just be able to solder these wires directly onto the new switches. So there's the one down here, and then the 2 up here. Not going to do anything with these actual switches, except maybe just clean up the boots a little bit, or try to. So I'm going to get those cut off, and then we'll pick back up with how I removed the switches from, or the buttons rather, from the plate. All right, quickly before I do that, so you'll see here there's 1 wire per each switch. There's 3 wires here in this example. There's 1 wire per switch that is all spliced together with a wire coming up from underneath the control stick. Now, at first you might think that these are grounds, but they're in fact not grounds. They're the exact opposite. This is the 12-volt power that is supplied to all of the switches that provides the power to the relay or whatever the other side of the switch is connected to when you push the button. So what I'm going to do is, for all these 3 wires that are connected to this splice, I'm actually going to just take a marker and put a long black line on all of them so I can identify which one is which, and then I'll show you how I've identified these top 2 buttons after I get them marked. Okay, so I went ahead and I've marked my wires. So you see this one here, I put a long I just put a long black marker line on it. This one also here, I've just put a long black marker line on it all the way back to the splice. And then to mark which wire goes to which, you'll see I put one dot here on the plate, and I have a one little dash on this wire, and then over here on the other side I put 2 dots, and then I put 2 short dashes on this wire. That way I make sure that I remember which wire is going to which button, so I don't have them backwards when I go to install them, because all these wires will more or less be the same length, and if you don't mark them, then you may get them, you may get the 2 control wires going to the relay or this, or the switch or whatever, backwards. Now the 2 here at the bottom, they're going to be obvious. I went ahead and I marked one of them, as you can see here, that goes back to the splice. I marked it with another long black line, but the other one, there's only going to be one place for it to go. So anyways, that's how I've marked them. I'm going to go ahead and cut them off now, and we'll get them out of there. All right, so as you can see here, I've cut them off. I've cut those wires off just as close to the button as I can, so that I can reuse all of the wire possible. So I apologize if the camera's a little bit shaky here. It's just sitting on my lap. There's not a ton of room to navigate in here, but I'll show you what I've used to get these out. And WD-40 or something like that might be better. Initially I thought that these buttons probably had a little bit of adhesive on them or something, but I think that they're just press fit in. But this is a little bit of acetone that I'm just using to kind of clean and lubricate, I guess. And I've just take a pair of needle nose pliers, and you can just push them out, and that's all there is to it. So it's pretty easy. You just want to make sure that if you have one that's a little bit stubborn, or if it gets dry, take your time, because you certainly don't want to break these plates, these panels, these plates, because that would really kind of ruin your day probably. But yeah, that's kind of all there is to it. It's just use a little bit of acetone or something like that. I like acetone because it sort of cleans, and it doesn't leave a residue. You don't have to worry about it being oily when you're finished. So this one here is it's being pretty stubborn. But, like I said, if you're patient, they'll just come right out. So there we go. I'll get this cleaned up a little bit, and then we'll get ready to put our new switches in. All right, so before we install our new buttons in our joystick, I've got, so I'm going to put a blue one in, and I'm going to put these 2 black ones in the top. So what I'm going to do before I go to the trouble to put these in is I'm going to go ahead and check them for resistance and make sure that these things are actually good buttons before I put them in. So just going to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do before alright, so showing that one's showing good. This one here, same thing. Showing pretty good. This one, same thing. Let's try it. I just want to make sure that before I go to the trouble to put these in, that they're all good and they're working like they're supposed to. That way, if I get one, if I get them in and something's not working, I don't have to be concerned that it's the switch that I put in that was faulty. It's something else on down the line. And I don't want to go to the trouble to put one of these switches in if it's not good to start with. All right, so I'm back in here now. I've got my wires all stripped and ready to go. Now, I stripped off about, I probably can't see that very good. That strip there, I stripped off probably 1/8 of an inch and no more. Because when you put these in, you're not going to have a ton of extra wire. So you want to keep as much as you possibly can, or else you're going to have to add some. So I just stripped off about 1/8 of an inch there. That was plenty of exposed wire on the other side, and now we'll put the switch in. So, or the button. I keep calling it a switch. It's a button. So this is just like the other side over here, and I didn't have a lot of trouble putting these in, even though they are the type of button that takes the jam nut, and the originals were sort of a press fit. I still didn't have much trouble. The only place that I had trouble with putting in any of the buttons was this one right here. And the reason why I had trouble putting this one in is because the hole is so close to those protrusions that the switches themselves screw into. So in other words, there's not much clearance between right here and the hole for the button. So what I had to do was, for the one on the other side and for this one, is the nut, the jam nut, I just took it over to my bench grinder and I ground down one side. So I just have a little bit of extra clearance over the way the jam nuts come from the factory. So anyways, we'll get this switch in, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. So here you can see I've got this part of the way in, and as you can see, there's just enough clearance there that you can get the side of the nut that I ground down in there. And what you kind of have to do for this is, once you get it in there, it's easiest if you actually spin the button itself to make it up. You can kind of grab the outside flange here and kind of tighten it that way, and then you can use a pair of pliers back here. Once you get it in far enough, you can use a pair of pliers back here and actually grab the housing and turn it and get it made up fairly tight. All right, so here we go. We got our buttons in now. As you can see here on the back, that doesn't look like a whole lot of room between those two nuts, but it actually is. These two up here, there's really no problem getting these in. Like I said, down here it's just this one. This is the one that's going to kind of test your patience. This one and the one on the other stick that's like the exact opposite. It's in the exact same spot. This is the one that's going to be tough to get. But as you can see, it does work. If you just grind off one side of the nut just a little bit, you are able to use these types of buttons that have the lock washer and the jam nut on them. There's plenty of room to make it happen. And yeah, so if I was doing this myself again for the first time, I definitely wouldn't start with these two buttons. I would actually probably start with the two on the other side here that are on the bottom, because there's nothing in the way for them. They're just hanging out there in space, and those are the only two things that you have to worry about. And that's probably the easiest place to start if you're going to try to do this. All right, so I'm gonna get set up to solder these wires in place, and I'll kind of walk you through what I've discovered and what I've tried as far as that goes. All right, real quick here, I'll just kind of show you the setup I've got for soldering these things. So this is, I'm not going to show the soldering itself because I just don't have enough hands. But that's sort of how I've got them. I've got the little spades bent over slightly, and then I've just got the wire put in there so it will kind of hold itself in place, so I don't have to worry about it. But that's sort of what they're going to look like before I solder them, and I'll get these soldered and I will pick it back up again and show you what we're going to do next. All right, so I just got these two soldered, and as you can see, it turns out pretty well, and it ends up being a pretty compact. It ends up being a pretty compact way to do it, and that's going to be important because there's not just a ton of room in these joysticks when you get them all put back together. If you decide to solder them on, like I did, one thing you're going to want to be careful of is if you get the spade on the switch too hot, if you're not good at soldering and you get the switch too hot, then it's going to melt the switch, and the switch is going to be no good, and you're going to have to take that switch out and put a new one in. So if you're going to solder them like I am, practice first, I would say. If you're not very good at soldering, either find a friend that is good at soldering or practice a lot first, because these are small wires, and if you get the switch too hot, or the button too hot, it will melt. That's what I did. The very first one I tried to do, I got it too hot and I melted it, and it ruined the button, and I just had to throw it out and start over. So this is I've got a Weller. This is the soldering iron. This is soldering iron that I've got, and this is kind of it's got a two-stage trigger on it, which is nice, because if you've got big wire or something like that, or if it's really cold, then it heats up really fast and does a good job. However, in this application, those wires are so small and the switches are so small that it's kind of like using the sledgehammer to drive, a tack. So you just got to be careful, practice a lot, be patient, or else you're just going to cause yourself more trouble than you need. Okay, I've got everything soldered here. I've got the one down there I showed you a minute ago. I've got these top two soldered now. They're good to go. And so before I move on, I'm going to give you a little bit of advice. So before you move on and go any further, check these again. Check these switches again, and I'll tell you why. These buttons again. Because if you get the housing or you get the spades or whatever too hot while you're soldering the connections on, then you may mess up the switch. And if you don't check after you've installed them, you put everything back together and your switch still doesn't work, or your switch doesn't work at all, then you're going to start wondering, what's going on. Well, just save yourself some time and do it now. Because I'll be honest, the first time I put this switch in and soldered these on, I got something too hot, and when I was checking this a second ago, this didn't work. So I had to put a new button in. So save yourself some time and do it now. Save yourself some potential headache and heartache. All right, so those are good to go. And I'm going to get ready, and I'll show you the next step in the process. All right, so here we are. We're all ready for the next step. And so you might be wondering, well, what are we going to do for insulation? Because if you'll notice, I didn't put any heat shrink or anything on these before I soldered them. So call me crazy if you want, but what I'm going to try, if I can get my camera set up to where we can all watch and see, but what I'm going to try is I borrowed my wife's hot glue gun. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use hot glue to try to isolate these wires from one another. And I've never tried this before. I think I've seen it before. I've never tried it before. But I think I'm gonna give it a shot on this. And I'll tell you why, as I squirt hot glue all over these. The reason why I'm trying to like this is because space is at a real premium inside this joystick. When you get everything back together, there's not a lot of extra space. And so if you watch to the end of the video, if you care, if you want to watch to the end of the video, I'll go through all the different ways that I tried to do all these different things, and some of the mistakes I made, and some of the things that I tried and didn't work. So if you're interested in that, watch to the end of the video. If you're not interested, then I'm not going to waste your time. But if you are interested, watch to the end of the video, and we'll kind of go over what worked for me and what didn't work for me. I think that's going to work. I was laying in bed the other night, and I was thinking of a way. How can I isolate those and use a lot less room than I did before? So if you think this is sketchy, maybe you're right. I'm going to try it. And I don't know. If you're adventurous, you can try it too. If you've done something like this before in the past with another project, put it down in the comments so we can all kind of share in your experience. Alright, so here is the half of our joystick put back together. You can see our buttons are in there. Our glue up on the top is covering everything so it doesn't get contacted. Really, the one down here on the bottom is the one that would be of most concern, because there are quite a bit of wires in these things, and as you can see, there's just these bottom ones especially, there's not a lot of room. There's not like extra room there. So that's one of the reasons why I did the buttons on this joystick the way I did them, bending the tabs over using the hot glue. It's just to make some extra room when I went to put everything back together. I'm just going to put this thing back together now. I'm not going to show you because it's just, put the other half on, put the screws in, put the little plugs in, and that's that. All right, there it is. There's our finished product. I'll put it back together. Buttons where they should be. Everything looks pretty good. I mean, they're not bad looking buttons, really, to be honest with you. And all we really got to show for it is we got a couple little holes in our little covers. But like I said, that was the best way I could figure to be able to get those out without just absolutely destroying them. And so whatever. I'm trying to think of some things that I can just finish up and recap. Would I use these particular buttons again? Maybe not. Just because of the simple fact that they were a little bit harder to install, I think, as far as the soldering and all goes. You had to be really careful not to get them too hot and melt them. I don't use the Skidsteer 12 hours a day, every day of the year, so I'm not too worried about the cycles of these buttons, like actually wearing them out. I'm not worried about these buttons being particularly weatherproof, because 95% of the time I'm going to be the one that's running the Skidsteer, and it's a captive machine, so I don't really have to worry about a lot of rain or a lot of water or whatever getting in here. So I wasn't too worried about that. If I didn't have a cab on it, and it was open, you know, open ROPS, probably wouldn't use these switches because I don't think, you know, they're not sealed, they're not weatherproof, that's for sure. So I would probably look at something a little bit different. If I had it to do all over again, really this process didn't take very long, and especially now that I've done it once, it wouldn't take me very long again to replace all these switches in both joysticks. But probably if I had to do it again, I would look for maybe a little bit better button to put in. Something that had the wires already connected to it, like the factory switches, might be a little bit easier because you'll have more, you'll have better accessibility probably to be able to solder or crimp those little wires back together. If I couldn't find, you know, a button with the pigtails already on it, then I wouldn't have a problem again just soldering these, or soldering another button in just like I did these. It's not that big a deal. I think there's a couple of places out there that are selling or claiming to sell the exact buttons that come in these from the factory. I'm not sure how they are, because I've looked these buttons up, and it says right on the print that's associated with these joysticks that the buttons are not for sale. They're only to be included in the joystick assembly. So they may be selling the exact same thing. I didn't look because I don't like the buttons anyways. I wouldn't put them back in my machine just because they're apparently not very good quality. My machine's 10 years old. It's got 2,500 hours on it. But even the buttons that are probably not used, you know, as frequently as some of the others, they were not in good shape. So why, you know, I'm not even going to bother. I'm going to find a different, if I want to buy a $20 button, I'm going to find a different $20 button that'll fit in here, that'll work just as well or better. Now that I know that I can use a button style that has the lock washer and the jam nut and everything will fit fine, that opens up your button opportunities, you know, to just about anything you want. You want a super cheap button like I put in here, you can get a super cheap button like I put in here. If you want to get a $10 button, get some $10 buttons. If you want to get fancy and have them backlit and get like weatherproof $30 buttons, get you some $30 buttons if that's what you're into. You know, typically I'm a guy that likes to put equipment back stock and how it came from the factory, but I think these buttons they're not junk, but they're definitely not what I would call a quality button for what they cost. And the fact that Rexroth says, no, you can't replace those buttons, just buy another joystick. Nah, that's just gonna be a hard pass. That just makes me not want to buy anything from Rexroth ever. So I hope this helped. Stick around if you want to see all the mistakes and all the screw ups that I made and all the stuff that I tried. But for those of you who just wanted to get through this, I tried to make it as brief as I could without rambling and without showing a bunch of stuff that you didn't want to see. If you have comments, if you have questions, put them down there. I didn't make this video to get rich on YouTube. I just made it so that it would maybe help somebody. So if you see somebody that has this question, point them towards the video. Maybe it'll help them, maybe it won't. If you're not comfortable performing the kind of repairs that I've performed in this video, just don't do it. Or do your research and then do it. Or practice and then do it. Or find a buddy that's good at this kind of stuff and let him help you and then do it. But the bottom line is, if you're not comfortable with it, just don't do it. Thanks a lot, guys. Stick around if you want to see all my screw-ups. Thanks. All right, so I assume that if you're still here, you want to hear about all the different ways that I've messed this up. And hopefully by doing this, can save some of you guys some time. All right, so I mentioned before that if you're not careful with these buttons, that you can melt them. And so here's the black one that I was just talking about a minute ago that I melted off, and actually pulled the spade when I was trying to get the wire out. So I could change the switch, I actually pulled the spade right out. So that's something to keep in mind if you're, looking at switches or buttons and you're trying to figure out which one to get. That's something to kind of keep in mind. That's one of the reasons why I said earlier that maybe ones that already had the wires, just a pigtail coming out, might be easier. So that's the first problem that I ran into when I was trying to install these buttons. It had been my plan all along to use to just solder the wires straight to the spades. That was my original plan. That's what I was going to do, and I decided that would work just fine. What I didn't anticipate at first was having problems controlling the heat to the point to which I didn't melt the switch. And so whenever I was putting the switches or the buttons in the left-hand joystick down the bottom, there's just a green and a yellow, and that's the only thing in that little panel. That's, as I mentioned before, that's what I did first. And the very first one I tried to solder was one of these green ones. When that happened, I thought, no, this isn't going to work. I'm going to have to try to find a different way to do this. And so I tried to think of what I could do, and what I ended up getting, I'll show you now. I decided, well, I'll go to the parts store and I'll get some little spades. Or not the spades, but the female part of the spade. And that's what I'll use. I'll just get some of these, and I'll just crimp or solder the wires into that. And I decided that, yeah, that'll work fine. That'll be the thing to do. And that way, if I ever have to replace a switch, it'll be just as easy as just unplugging it and plugging it back into the new switch. And ideally, I would say that would be the easiest thing to do. That'd be the best thing to do. But I realized when I got home, when I really got to thinking about it, is that the way some of these things in the joysticks are spaced. You've got a switch or a set of buttons on the bottom, and then you've got a switch or a set of buttons on the top, and the backs butt up to each other. And so as you saw in the video, there's really not, when you put everything back together, there's not a ton of room behind everything. And so I quickly realized that the spades weren't really going to work like I thought they would. Now, if you can get a spade that's like 90 degrees, so like here's the spade and the wire can go in from here. Now that might be better, and that might work just fine. But for what I had, handy without having to order something in, that's what I found at the parts store. I realized that is not what was that wasn't going to work because I just didn't have the room. So once I kind of decided that, I thought, well, okay, let me go back to the soldering idea, because that's probably just what I'm going to have to do. And so I got to thinking then that, well, in the past, I have tried to use these things. And you probably know what these are. And if you don't, it's shrink wrap and solder all in one. That gray thing is a ring of solder. And so my thought was, it's hard to hold the solder, hold the soldering iron, hold everything in place, keep the wire from coming out from where you need it. And so my thought was, well, I'll use one of these and I'll cut it down to about right here, and I'll just shove this onto the spade. I'll just show you real quick. Get one of these other switches out. So, put the wire through here, put the wire into the spade like it needs to go, And then I'll just shove this on there, and I'll just heat the whole thing up, and it'll keep the wire in place. The solder's already there, so I don't have to mess with that. And it'll just be great. And so that's what I did. The picture that's inserted right now is the first 2 buttons that I put together in that fashion. Now, in the past, I have not had good luck with these things at all. It doesn't matter how I do it. I could be putting, 2 pieces of wire that's the exact same gauge together. I could be using the heat gun like you're supposed to be using. I could be using my little torch like I use on all the rest of my shrink wrap that I ever use. It never fails. I always end up with a cold solder joint. Like, I don't know if I'm using the wrong brand. I don't know what it is. So if you guys have good luck with these things, put it down in the comments, because maybe I'm just using the ones that are too cheap, or maybe I'm not using the right kind or whatever. But I've tried. I want to like these things, but every time I just end up with a cold solder joint, and I don't have time for that. So that's what I tried to do. I realized when I was soldering my 3rd button in that wasn't going to work, and I just had a cold solder joint. And so I just decided that there's one that I was kind of playing with after I already destroyed the switch, or the button, I mean. I just decided that wasn't going to work. So then I was just back to using the soldering iron. And I realized when I went back to try it again that if I was really careful and I took my time, and I used my little jig thing that I have that's got alligator clips on it and all that, if I got everything just right and it was just perfect and really took my time, that I could get them soldered without screwing up the buttons. So that's how I went forward, and that's what I did. Now, to isolate the spades and the wire from anything else that's inside there, I was just using shrink wrap like I would normally use. And I realized that as I did that, I realized that maybe I would have a problem with getting all of this stuff jammed back together when I went to put the 2 halves of the joystick back together. Because originally what I had when I used my shrink, some kind of like this. It's good shrink wrap. It's a shrink wrap with the adhesive on the inside. But that shrink wrap, a lot of times, is pretty stiff when you finish shrinking it. And so this is kind of what I had. This is what it kind of ended up looking like. And even when I bent it down like this, it was still pretty stiff. And when I went to put, on the first joystick, when I went to put the 2 halves back together, there was, I'm not saying that it was an interference fit, but there really wasn't enough space between the 2 halves of the the buttons and then the switches on top. There really wasn't enough space in between there for the wires that have to run through there and the new buttons and the shrink wrap. So that's when I decided, because I did that first joystick a couple of days ago, because I kind of wanted to figure it out before I made a video about the other one, so I could just put in a video what worked the best. So I was laying in bed, and that's when I got to thinking about the hot glue. And maybe that was a mistake. I don't know for sure. It definitely is much more compact than using the shrink wrap as I did on the other joystick. But tell me what you think in the comments, because I like to learn things. And I made this video because it was something that I needed to fix. it was something that I had seen on, message boards and Facebook groups and, other places on the internet where this is a big problem, I think, in all JCB equipment, is these buttons just, they don't last long enough, in my opinion. And so I wanted to figure out something better. As I said before, would I use these buttons again? I think the jury is still out. Now, if these buttons last me 3 or 4 years of my occasional use of my skid steer, well, that's probably good enough for me. Now, if I got to start, replacing these buttons in, in a month or two after occasional use, well, then that's probably not so good. If I had a skid steer that I was making a living with and, I used it very frequently and I used all the buttons very frequently, well, I probably would try to find a little bit better button. Now, for me, again, I wouldn't put the original buttons back in because I think there's just got to be something better out there. And especially is that now that I know that, I can get a button of that size and of the jam nut, style, and they'll work just fine. They'll go in just fine and won't be any interference. So I still don't think I'd go back to the standard button that's supplied with the Rexroth joysticks. I think I'd try to find something better. But for me, the $200 probably that I would have had in those other buttons by the time I got them bought and got them shipped to me, I wasn't really into that, especially since I wasn't sure that the jam nut style was going to work. So I think that's it. That's kind of all I wanted to show you guys about the things that I messed up or the things that I would have done differently. I think that if you got any questions, if you want to know anything further, put it down in the comments. I like to talk about this stuff. This is the kind of stuff that I do for fun. I fix stuff like this. And so if you got questions, let's talk about it. Thanks for watching. Until we need to fix something else. We'll see you.